Hello everyone. Uh, REST is highly used in today's web applications, in almost all web applications basically. So I thought maybe it's a good idea to give you a brief idea what is REST. So REST is basically used or applied on top of HTTP or hypertext transfer protocol. So HTTP is an application layer protocol through which you can transfer documents or pages or any other messages, for example in the form of HTML. So HTTP was designed for communication between web browsers and web servers. So using your web browser, you can send any request to a application server or a web server, let's say to other applications. Since REST is based on HTTP, HTTP also has some common methods or operations like get, post, put and delete for various purposes. And those are analogous to various database commands like for get or to retrieve some messages or resources. In HTTP or in REST we can use get. For updating or creating new resources we can use either post or put depending on what type of resource it is, and also for deleting or removing a resource from your database, for example, you can use a simple delete method. Because HTTP is very simple, the applications that are designed using RESTful principles or REST is also very simple to use in terms of development and in terms of consuming the services. In web applications or in the web world, there are three basic components like firewalls, routers and caching or caches. So what firewall does, it decides which message, if I think about it as a HTTP message, so which HTTP message will be accepted and will be sent both from and to your browsers and the application server. So the firewalls basically controls the web security, the security of in terms of your machine or browser, and also the security in terms of the application server or web server. And then we also have routers. So we everybody has routers in their home as a Wi-Fi hardware, but there are also other uses for routers. So it's basically send or forward the messages, and if a router can forward a message to multiple users or to multiple requests it can handle, then it comes to the scaling part. So the web scaling is handled by routers because it can send and forward all the requests and responses. So depending on how many users it can handle, it refers to the web scaling. And then also there is the caching. So this is another aspect of or important aspect of HTTP or REST, where you can store certain data temporarily, and for having the same data the users don't need to send duplicate or redundant requests to the web server. So in this way it does not overload the network, and it can basically maximize the speed. But this firewall, routers and caches, they don't look into your message. So the web message is composed of two parts, mainly the header and the payload. So the HTTP header, it contains the metadata, and the payload contains the actual message or the body of the message. So all these web components like firewall, routers and caches, they look into your HTTP header to decide if it should be accepted or where it should be redirected and so on. And then once the message is accepted or the message is redirected to a proper destination, the users or the requester use this payload to read the actual message. So what is REST? REST was a very new term even 10 years ago, and in his PhD thesis, Roy Fielding, it's around I think in the year of 2000, he introduced this term REST, which leverage the benefits of HTTP, and he proposed REST architectural pattern that have some design principles. Let's say you want to make your applications more flexible, efficient, fast, secured, and highly autonomous from the customers or clients, then you should consider REST to design your applications. So REST basically propose a set of design patterns or some design principles. If you apply them, your application will be highly secured, super fast, and manageable in today's world, web world. So here is a simple example why and how REST is so useful. As I mentioned, REST is designed around the resources. So traditionally, the web applications or web services, they were designed around jobs or tasks. So when we are creating a web service, we were developing a service, a task that can do some dedicated job. But when the REST was introduced, it considered everything that we have on the web or in the internet as resources. So client consider whatever information we have around us as resources. Let's say in this picture, client want to get information about a flight, that is Boeing 747, about a plane basically. So we have in the internet at some places, and in some places we have this information stored. So the client send a request in the form of an URL using a HTTP method. Let's say the method get here, in response to which the web server or the application server will send a document. In this case, let's say an HTML document to the client, where it will have all the information about this resource. So in this case, Boeing 747 resource. Let's say how much is the fuel requirements for this plane, what is the maintenance schedule, and so on. So the bottom line here is the client references a web resource using a URL. You can also call it URI, Uniform Resource Identifier. Here the 747 is the identifier for this resource. Every resource has a representation. In this case, it was an HTML. It can be in any other form. And when the client selects a link in the REST, it is known as hyperlink. In this document, let's say fuel requirements is a link or a hyperlink, maintenance schedule is a link. There might be other multiple links provided as part of the response to the request that was sent by the client. So client can follow these links to further move on. So this is called, in other words, in REST, state transition. And since for each transition we might change the representation, and also for each transition we might get new states or new links, and we are transferring from one state to another state in the application. This is how the name basically was proposed. So representational state transfer. In general, REST is not a standard. REST does not provide any strict specification or rule. Let me see why my video was appeared. And REST does not provide any standard, so there is no specification by W3C, for example, or there is no specific tool for REST by IBM or any other providers. REST is simply a design pattern. It's simply a architectural style that you should follow if you want your applications to be more efficient, if you want to serve more customers, if you want your applications to be stateless, meaning that you don't store any user data in your server. So among those standards, few of them are HTTP. So HTTP is the baseline for REST. You must use HTTP if you are trying to implement your application as a RESTful service. Obviously you need URL or URI to identify your resources. Since you have resources might have multiple representations. It can be even a text document, it can be an XML, it can be an HTML, even it can be an image or PDF and so on. So those are various resource representation, and then there are resource type that you need to also mention in your application design. So if your resource type, let's say an XML, then the standard type is text/XML. If your resource is an HTML, which is a text type, then your resource type will be text/HTML and so on. Also, for example, if your resource is a GIF file, which is a type of image, then your resource type will be image/GIF. So in that way there are hundreds of resource types. So that was a basic idea on REST, and now let's give an example, a practical example how REST web services or RESTful web services work in practice. So let's say we have a web service from a company, Parts Depot, and this Parts Depot provides a web service so that the clients or the users can get a list of their parts. They can get detailed information about a part. They can even purchase or submit a purchase order through their web service or through their website. So in this case, my video is always going away. What Parts Depot will do, it will develop a service, and their service will be obviously resource-based service. So one service, for example, get a list of parts. So here parts is the resource, and they will provide you a URL, for example, in this form, partsdepot.com/parts, which if you make a request, let's say get and then this URL/parts, it will give all the parts that that company has. And in this way, one thing is ensured that the client and the application are highly are loosely coupled. Basically, the client is not dependent on the application, and the application is not dependent on the client. So anyone who has this URL, anyone who is authenticated to make this request, they can get the list of parts. And when so as I mentioned already, that REST is designed along the resources, and each resource has an identifier. And when you make a request using that URL, let's say using the HTTP GET method, you can get a list of links in your response. So let's say they have 4 parts, and each part has a unique link. So they have parts from 345 until 348. With this response, what user can do, he can further follow one of these links and get further information about the parts, about the specific parts. So that is another service. So with one service, we got the list of all the parts, and with another service, what we can do, we can get more detail about a specific parts. And for doing that, user can make another request. Let's say get and then partsdepot.com/parts/ an ID of the part of a part. So this is the first part basically. And by organizing resources in this way using the slash, basically you are branching the resources. So we had 4 parts, and now if we have add another node or item in our request URL, we can further dig down on that specific part. And when the user will send another GET method using this URL, he will get basically more detail about that part 00345. So which has a ID, which has a name, which has some description, some specification, which also had an URL itself, what is the price and so on, and how many they have in their inventory. And as you can see, the response that we received is in a XML format, but it can be in JSON, it can be in any other format, it can be even in PDF. But using an XML and JSON gives more flexibility for the client-side application developers, let's say in terms of parsing, and you can easily follow or visit this link by parsing this XML, or even it could be a JSON. So once the user got this XML response, he can basically follow this link, and these are known as hyperlinks in REST. And when the user follow this link further using, let's say, another GET method, he basically moved from one state to another state, and this is called state transition in REST. I hope I could give a basic idea and overview on REST. And in the today's world, REST is already a dominant design pattern for web applications. There are other web application design principles, but those are not useful for large-scale web applications. Thank you.